The purpose of Sefer Mishlei is la da'at chochma umusar lahavin imre bina, that it's about learning wisdom and discipline, understanding important words. So basically, it's about how to lead your life wisely, we could say. And even though maybe I know myself included, we're not so familiar with much of Mishle overall. It spans 31 prakim, I believe. We are familiar with some phrases from Mishle, and I put them over here for you. Eitz chaim hi lamachazikim ba. We, of course, referring, we think, to the Torah, that it is the tree of life. Shma b'ni musar avicha, that you should listen to your father, to the musar of your father, val titosh Torah imecha. So there are some phrases that we're familiar with. And specifically, the poem I think that we're most familiar with that comes from Mishle is the Eshet Chayil. And Eshet Chayil is, I think most people, many people, at least many households, sing this as a song every week on Friday night, praising the women of the house or the wife, the mother of the house, grandmother. And it comes from the last parak in Mishle. What's interesting, I think, is that Eshet Chayil really only starts about 10 psukim into the last parak of Mishle. And it starts off with a fascinating and somewhat perplexing introduction. And so before we get into the Eshet Chayil and how it might relate to the two female protagonists I want to talk about today, Bathsheba and Ruth, I do want to delve a little bit into this introduction about the Eshet Chayil. And it says the beginning of Perek Lamed Aleph of Perek 31, chapter 31 of Mishle says, Divrei Limuel Melech Masa Asher Yisratu Ima. These are the words of Limuel, the king of Masa, with which his mother admonished him. And the parak essentially starts off by saying that these are words that this mother is criticizing a king with. And she goes on to say that this king is writing about the words that his mother uses. And it goes on to say, I'll read the English, no, my son, no, O son of the womb, no, O son of my vows, do not give your strength to women, your vigor to those who destroy kings. And she goes on, wine is not for kings, O Limuel, not for kings to drink, not any drink for princes. So she goes on to warn him about different things that this woman may lead him astray about. Essentially, she's saying, in so many words, marry the right person. Marry someone who is not going to lead you astray, but who's going to be the right person. And this entire lead up leads us to Pasuk Yod, the 10th verse in Parak 31, which starts with the very famous Eshet Chayil mi imsa v'rachak mipninim michra. Rather, you should, what a rarity it is to find this Eshet Chayil, and she's the one who you should be with. Her worth is far beyond that of rubies. And then so goes the song that we sing, many of us at least sing every Friday night. And so I think most of us, and at least I didn't know until I did some research into this, that really this song, this Eshet Chayil, is preceded by this idea that it was actually written by a mother who's criticizing her son, who's admonishing the son who's a king, saying, make sure you take the right wife, because that could really set the tone or set you up for success in your life. And many of the Parshanim try to figure out first, who is this Limuel? Who is this man? Who are we talking about? We know all of Mishle was written by Shlomo. Why do we suddenly switch to this new king? The Gemara says, well, of course, we're still talking about Shlomo. And I brought a quote here from Vayikra Rabbah. Why is this king calling himself Limuel? Why is it Divrei Limuel? It says, El lemelachim Limuel, Amar Rav Yochanan, Ein notzni malchut lemi shemaflig al dvarim shel El. So it is basically, we don't give monarchy to those who contradict the words of God. Essentially saying that the mother is admonishing her son, the king, to follow Hashem and marry the right person. And she's saying that Lama El, do not be somebody who contradicts the word of Hashem. And that's why, even in the name, this person is called Limuel. And so it's not so much that there's this new king who is this random king whose mother is admonishing him, but rather this is Shlomo under this pet name, under this guise of Lamael, that he could become somebody who contradicts the word of Hashem if he goes down this path of not being with the correct woman. Which of course means that if it's true that Limuel in Mishle is really still Hamelech Shlomo, then that means that the Eshet Chayil is attributed to or potentially written by none other than Shlomo's wife, who was, Shlomo's mother, who was Bathsheba. And so I would like to explore a little bit of Bathsheba, who she was, what her life was like, and why she may have been the one to write the Eshet Chayil, and why she wrote the Eshet Chayil in this way. Oops. All right. Hopefully you could still see me. Oops. Not switching. Okay, there we go. Oops. There we go. So I'd like to just talk about Bathsheba for just a minute. Bathsheba, Shlomo's mother, she came from a very well-connected family. According to Divrei Hayamim, she was actually the granddaughter of Achitophel. Achitophel was one of David's top advisors until he abandons David, very infamously. She was also married to a war general named Uriah. And of course, the very sad and tragic story goes that Bathsheba was bathing on the roof one night. Her husband was at war fighting with Bnei Ammon. David goes up to the roof and he sees her and he's overcome by desire. He takes her and they sleep together. And this results in a pregnancy. In order to cover up the pregnancy, David then goes and tries to have Uriah killed through different means. He manages to have Uriah killed on the battlefield. And the child that was conceived that night dies shortly after his birth. And they have a second child together. David then marries Bathsheba, and they have a second child together who is Shlomo HaMelech. Now, there's an interesting blog. It's called What's Pshat, written by Rabbi Alex Magid. I think he's spoken for Torah and Moshe before. He's from Toronto. It's a wonderful blog. I think he's no longer posting regularly, but it's worth reading for those who are interested. And he points out that many of the themes of the Bathsheba story are actually very much rooted in the parsha of Eshet Yafat Toar, which is the parsha that starts off the Parshat Kitetse and Dvarim. And he points out that the Eshet Yafat Toar essentially is a woman who's taken in battle, and a man is overcome by this desire in battle. And so he takes this woman and he takes her back to his home. And I brought the source for you here. And you start taking captives. You see a beautiful woman and you take her back to your house, and there are laws associated with how to treat her. Interestingly, immediately following the parsha of Eshet Yafat Toar, we learn about the Isha Hasnua, a woman who a man may no longer love, and that starts here in Pasuk Yud Daled. And then that very quickly moves into the laws of the Ben Sorer Umoreh, the wayward son, who is not following in the ways of Hashem. And many of the Parshanim try to understand what is the similarity between these three laws, the Eshet Yafat Toar, the Isha Hasnua, and the Ben Sorer Umoreh. And they say, well, it makes sense that if you have a woman who you took in the middle of battle, and who really you were just drawn by your most base desire, and that's what drew you to take this woman, you may eventually come to hate this woman, and then the product of this union will result in a child who understands his place in the household as being the product of a hated marriage, and he will become a wayward son, a Ben Sorer Umoreh, as a result of these terrible circumstances. And so one can imagine in terms of Bathsheba, it doesn't perfectly line up. She wasn't taken as a captive, but she was definitely taken within the context of the war. And so much of her life was really surrounded, was really led and influenced by this context of being taken as really like a prized wife through really within the context of battle. And so one can imagine how the children of Bathsheba actually would really be at risk to be these wayward children, these Ben Sorer Moreh, which someone once pointed out when I was talking about this to someone. They said, maybe that's one of the reasons why that child had to die, essentially, that there was just so much that was rotten about how the relationship came to be, and that the child would never really be able to lead a successful life, which is a terrible thing to think. But even Shlomo himself was at risk, really, of becoming a Ben Sorer Moreh. And sorry. And really, I think this whole context, it's unsurprising to us. There's so many different examples in the Tanakh of times when war and illicit or untoward sexual relationships really come together. One of the most famous examples that really ought that come to mind for me is at the very end of Sefer Shoftim, when we learn about the Pilegesh Bagiva, this concubine wife who is horribly, I mean, led to being raped in Shevet Binyamin, which leads to an entire civil war. And at the very end of this civil war, when Shevet Binyamin no longer has women to marry, the conclusion of Bnei Israel at that time is that they'll let women go into the field, and the people of Binyamin would just snatch the women and take the women that they want. Again, through this like frenzy of war, there's also this emotional feeling of just taking women, and this lewdness, these relationships that come about in ways that we don't really approve of. I would say absolutely, in our Torah life. And I think that Bathsheba does, in many ways, as Rabbi Alex Magi points out, she very much falls under this category. And so, interestingly, throughout this whole episode of her being maybe within this context of this Eshet Yifat Torah at the beginning of her life, she very much changes her path at the end of her life. And we could see that in Sefer Malachim. Sorry, I didn't put the source up there. I'll add it in. This is Sefer Malachim Perek Aleph, starting at Pasuk Tetvav. And Bathsheba, at this point in her life, she's older. She already has a son, a grown-up son, Shlomo HaMelech. And at that time, when David is about to die, one of his older sons, Adoniah, decides that he wants to become king. And he comes to Bathsheba, and he essentially asks Bathsheba for permission from her that she should go and ask the king on his behalf that Adoniah would marry one of essentially David's concubines. We won't get into the full story. And Bathsheba, through this, realizes that her son Shlomo is at risk of losing the Malucha, and she takes initiative. And she, through Natan Hanavi, who's very close with David, she approaches David, Vatavo Bathsheba El Hamelach Hachadara, V'Hamelach Zaken Me'od, V'Abishaga Shunamit, Misharet El Hamelach. So she approaches David Hamelach in his room, Vatikod Bathsheba, Vatomer Lo, in Pasuk Yud Zayin, Adoni Atanish Bata Bahashem Elokecha, La'amatecha, Ki Shlomo Banecha Yimlach Acharecha. And she says, listen, David, you promised me that Shlomo was going to be king. And she advocates on behalf of her family and herself and her son, Vehu Yeshev al Kis'i, and he would be the one to take over, not Adoniah. And David actually listens to her. And he says, okay, yes, I hear what you're saying. I understand. And and he gets rid of Adoniah. And of course, we know that Shlomo becomes the next king of Israel. And so I think Bathsheba's life, if we think about it, she really moves from this very passive position as she was initially taken, maybe in essence or in thematically, as the Eshet Yifat Torah, a very passive woman, to really being the queen, to really having the ear of both Natan Hanavi, some of the king's closest advisors, as well as David Hamelech. And that really, I think, bookends Bathsheba's life, that movement from being a very passive voice to being an advocate for herself, for her son, for her family. And so I think, given that context of Bathsheba's life, it's unsurprising that if we are to attribute the Eshet Chayil to her, that she's actually writing the Eshet Chayil using motifs of war. And there are many, many motifs of war and war-like words throughout the Eshet Chayil. And I brought a few for you here, but hopefully this Shabbos, while you're singing, you can also pay attention to more because there are many, many that come up. Of course, Eshet Chayil, we call it a woman of valor, but really Chayil is a warrior, right? It's a warrior woman. And Ish Chayil is someone who's a warrior. We talk about that. She talks about, we mentioned in the Eshet Chayil machra, or price, which is very reminiscent of selling and buying of different slaves or even concubines, as we talked about with Eshet Fatar. We say shalal lo yachsar, that she doesn't have a lack of spoils. Chagra be'oz matneha, she girds her loins. I mean, these are very warlike motifs. Batach bala, her husband trusts her, which we know this word betach is very much used in the context of war and peace. In this week's parsha, for example, right before the Tochacha, we have in this past week's parsha, in Parshat Bechukotah, it said, Vishavtem al haaretz lavetach, that if you listen to Hashem, your enemies won't bother you because you will be in safety, you'll be in security. And it's used throughout the Tanakh as this foil almost to war. Vata'amat zeroteha, she strengthens her arms. And there are many, many more. I just brought a few. But really, there is this idea of this motif of war throughout the Eshet Chayil, which is interesting if we think of the Eshet Chayil just in a silo without understanding the broader context. But I think for Bathsheba, she really understood that a true Eshet Chayil was somebody who could she's using these motifs of war to somehow strengthen her relationship and strengthen the marriage. And many Parshanim look at the Eshet Chayil and try to figure out not who wrote the Eshet Chayil, but who is the subject of the Eshet Chayil. Who is the Eshet Chayil about? And I think that I've seen some midrashim about how, well, this was actually written about Sarah Imenu and many of the characteristics of Sarah Imenu. There's another parshan that I read that talked about how there are like 18 different women that the Eshet Chayil could be referring to. The Da'at Mikra, actually, almost in passing, as the Da'at Mikra often does, has a throwaway comment here in Mishlei that quite obviously the Eshet Chayil is talking about Ruth HaMoaviyah. The Eshet Chayil is clearly written about Ruth. And actually, my brother-in-law, Rabbi Mordechai Torchiner, who many from Toronto are very familiar with, about 15 years ago or so, I think he gave a shiur about how he saw this comment in the Da'at Mikra, and he said, this is so interesting. How is the Eshet Chayil related to Ruth? And he said, you know what? Eshet Chayil fits Ruth's personality so well. There are so many themes in the Eshet Chayil that fit into Ruth's personality. And he breaks down some characteristics of Ruth HaMoaviyah. And he says that we know that Ruth was very loyal. Of course, she was very loyal to Naomi. She's trustworthy. She's someone who Naomi was able to trust with many. I mean, Naomi came, desperate. She had nothing. She was destitute when they traveled from the fields of Moab back to Eretz Yisrael. But she trusts in Ruth. Ruth eventually becomes very successful through her marriage to Boaz. She actually has physical strength when she's in the fields and she's picking up those big barrels of wheat, bringing them back to Naomi to feed them both, excuse me. And she really is an initiator. She initiates her way into becoming a Jewish person, and she's very pious as she decides to become a Jewish person, and as she decides to follow Hashem, which is ultimately why many people say we read Ruth on Shavuot, someone who took the initiative, somebody who decided by themselves to follow in Hashem's ways, which I think is the theme really of Shavuot. And says Rabbi Torchiner that if we think about the definition of chayil, who is a chayil in the Tanakh, there are actually 5 different definitions of chayil, which match up and line up beautifully with Ruth's personality. We think about it, Ruth was trustworthy, and we have a pasuk, Vayomer Shlomo. This is also from Sefer Melachim, Im yeh laben chayil. So if this person is trustworthy, if he's a chayil, lo yipol misarata arza, then I won't kill him. The chayil may be also someone who acquires wealth from Yirmiyahu, chelcha, ba'otzrotecha lavazeten, right? That I'll give your chayil, meaning I'll give your wealth and your storehouses to be despoiled. Chayil, as we said, is a person of strength. Vatihi Israel, Shmona Me'od Elef, Ish chayil. These are anshe chayil, physically strong people. Chayil is someone who takes initiative. Va'achechem ish chayil b'koach la'avda. Their brothers were ish chayil, with strength to work. This is in Divrei Hayamim. People were called up, and the anshe chayil who took initiative came. And chayil is a person of piety. As we know from Sefer Shmot, V'ata techazeh mikol ha'am anshe chayil, yirei Elohim, anshe emet v'sonei batza. This is talking about when Yitro is giving Moshe advice, what kind of people should be the shotrim, shoftim, which kind of people should be judges of Bnei Israel, people who are yirei Elohim, anshe chayil. And these characteristics, as we just said, really do match up nicely with the root characteristics. And so it is potentially possible that Bathsheba is not just writing to her son Shlomo about this woman who he should marry in the abstract, but she's thinking about somebody who really did exist not that long before. We know that Ruth was David HaMelech's great grandmother, which makes Ruth Shlomo's great great grandmother, and Bathsheba's great grandmother-in-law. And so she's looking just a little bit in her past towards someone who she feels is worth emulating as an Eshet Chayil, Ruth HaMoaviyah. And if we actually think about it a little more deeply, it's not just that Ruth possesses these qualities, but she really did live in a time that was similar to Bathsheba, was very dangerous, was strife with war. We know that she lived in the times of the Shoftim, Vayhi Meshvat HaShoftim. That's the opening of Sefer Ruth. And we also know that this was a time of great danger for people, particularly women. As I mentioned before, at the very end of Sefer Shoftim, we know that the people advised the men of Binyamin to go into the fields and just pick women who were there. Or item v'hine im yetzu bnot Shilah lachol b'mcholot v'yatzatem min hakramim v'chatavtem lachem ish ishto mibnot Shilah. You should just go and you should take these women from the field. And we know that Ruth spent a lot of time in the fields, and how that could have been a very dangerous situation for her. And despite all of this, Ruth really was able to overcome this time period, and she became very respected and very well regarded among her people. And I'm sure that Bathsheba really saw this as a real strength of character and a strength of someone who maybe she and other women, or at least the women who her son Shlomo would take, would really emulate to be a true Eshet Chayil. Of course, we know that Ruth is the only woman in Tanakh to be called an Eshet Chayil, and she's called that by her mother-in-law Naomi at the end of Sefer Ruth. V'ata biti al tir'i, my daughter, don't be scared. Kol asher tamri e'aseh lach, ki yodea kol shar ami ki eshet chayil at. I know that you are truly an eshet chayil. And I hope that as we move into Shavuot and we read Megillat Ruth, we maybe read it with this context, with the context of the Eshet Chayil, and also with this idea that there was someone who came after Ruth who so admired her and who was so impressed by how she was able to act in a time of danger and in a time of war, that she not only called her an Eshet Chayil, but perhaps penned an entire poem, an entire song for her, using these motifs that were so difficult and plagued her own life, plagued Bathsheba's life, and that Ruth was able to overcome. And really, may we all be zocha to see men and women, continue to be zocha to see men and women in this time of war who really, truly are anshe chayil in every sense of the word. And I would like to wish everyone a Chag Sameach. Rabbi Kelman, I think I've finished even under time.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, Yeshikov, very nice as always, and we look forward to learning with you. I think live in Toronto next week, right?
Oh,
We'll get to see
very
you
excited.
next week.
I will
Okay.
see. Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Okay.
I
Yes.
think
Yes.
we
Yes.
have some questions, so I'm happy to take a look.
I think there's one comment. I think. Yeah. Take a quick look, and then we'll
Okay,
get started.
okay.
Gershon. Yeah.
I think it's
Gershon.
I, I think I think it's when we sing the Eshet Chayil to our wives on Shabbat,
Mm-hmm.
they're saying they're the opposite of Moaviot, who are totally forbidden to us.
Oh, very interesting. Very interesting. The opposite of Moabiyat. Okay, interesting. Even though Ruth was herself a Moabiyat, she was maybe able to. She was able
She was
to
transformed
transformed,
from Ruth HaMoaviyah
cast off
to
that
Ruth
Moabite
Eshet
status.
Chayil in the actual Megillah itself.
Mm-hmm. Right,
And
she transforms into the Eshet Chayil. He does not follow his own advice, says Gershon. Right, yes, interesting. I do agree. And there's actually some interesting parallels where it's almost that people are giving Shlomo advice to be more like Boaz. And I think there's some interesting parallels or motifs that hang between those two characters, Boaz and Shlomo, that are interesting to explore as well, and how he maybe goes on a different path from Boaz and is not Zocha to the Eshet Chayil. So I think that's very nice.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank
Yeah. Yeah.
you.
Yeah. We are. Okay. We're
Go
thinking.
ahead.
Well,
Yes,
thank you. Regards.
continue.
Okay. Rachel,
Okay.
you want to say hello?
Hi, everyone.
Okay, welcome. So since you have this schut of being the only person on today's program who has not spoken for Torah in Motion before, so we'll give you a little bit of an introduction only. Everybody else will know, but really a pleasure to welcome you, I guess, from Efrat. Now, right, you're speaking from Efrat, and
I'm currently in Jerusalem
okay,
physically,
but
but
you live
from
in
abroad in
Efrat.
general.
You
Yes.
live, it's nearby. Okay. Rachel is a graduate of Stern College, the GPATS program, Yoatzot Halacha, and the Lindenbaum program you're teaching at Lindenbaum, and it's a pleasure to welcome you. You can go 3 minutes overtime, 4 minutes overtime. We'll give you the full half an hour if you need it. So, okay. Bakasha, the missing
Okay.
date of Shavuot, then let's get started.
Thank you. Yeah, 30 minutes was already like a tight time frame, so we'll see what we can get done in that amount of time. I really have 3 goals, and we'll see how many of them we accomplish. The first one is to convince you that there is something strange about the holiday of Shavuot. The second one is to convince you that this is not a coincidence, that it's on purpose, that there's something strange about the holiday of Shavuot. And then the third thing is to try to convince you of what I think is the reason for there being something strange about Shavuot. But even if we just get the first one or the first two, that will be successful in my mind, and hopefully it will give us something to think about as we lead up to the holiday next week, and something to continue thinking about sort of over the course of the next week as we note some of the features of the holiday or features that are missing. The sources are in the chat, and I will attempt to occasionally peek at the chat for questions, but I'm about to share my screen so that you can see the sources up on the screen as well. So I'm just going to do that. Okay, so the first thing, really what we want to talk about is when is the holiday of Shavuot? When does the holiday take place? So what we normally would do is we would go to Parshat Emor in Sefer Vayikra to what we call Parshat HaMoadot, the section that lists the dates of all of the holidays in the Torah. And so if you look in source number 1, you'll see I just brought a selection of psukim. B'chodesh harishon ב14 לחודש בין harbaim Pesach LaHashem. The first month, which is Nisan, on the 14th day, that's when Pesach is. Then skip to Pasuk Chaf Dalet. Skip to Pasuk Chaf Dalet. דבר אל בני ישראל לאמור בחודש השביעי באחד לחודש יהיה לכם שבתון זיכרון תורה מקרא קודש. on the first of the 7th month, there will be a holiday that will be a remembrance of blowing. That's the holiday that we call Rosh Hashanah. Next pasuk, pasuk Chav Zayin, Ach ba'asor lachodesh hashvi hazeh yom hakippurim hu mikra kodesh. The 10th day of the month of Tishrei, that is the holiday of Yom Kippur. Pasuk Lamed Daled, you can tell where we're going with this. Daber el b'nei Yisrael lemor b'chamisha asar yom lachodesh hashvi hazeh chag haSukkot. On the 15th day of the 7th month, which is Tishrei, that is the holiday of Sukkot. Okay, so we covered Rosh Hashanah, we covered Yom Kippur, we covered Sukkot, we covered Pesach. What about Shavuot? What's the date of Shavuot? So here we note something strange. If you go back, we have Pasuk Hey, right, which tells us the 14th day, that's when we bring Korban Pesach. Pasuk Vav, on the 15th day of the month, that's when really Pesach starts, and 7 days we eat matzot. Then skip to Pasuk 15, Ted Vav, again, I didn't bring the whole parak. Usfartem lachem mimocharat haShabbat, and you shall count for yourselves from the day after the Shabbat, which we understand to mean from the first day of Pesach. Miyom haviachem et omer hatznufa, from the day that you bring the sacrifice of the omer. Sheva Shabbatot tmimot tiyena, you should count 7 full weeks. Ad mimacharat haShabbat hashvi tisperu 50 yom v'yikrabtem mincha chadasha laHashem. And then the day after the 49 days of the 7 perfect weeks, that will be the 50th day, and you shall bring a new sacrifice before God, a new mincha offering. Ukratem be'etzem hayom hazeh mikra kodesh yelachem kol melachat avodah lo tasu chukat olam b'chol moshevotechem l'dorotechem. And that day shall be mikra kodesh. That day shall be holy. That day shall be special. You shall not do any work. That's the day that we call Shavuos. Shavuot. Chazal call it Atzeret. What's missing? The date. We don't have the date. The date of Shavuot is not listed in the Torah. Now, we talk about holidays in a bunch of different places. We never find out the date of Shavuot explicitly. And in fact, for a long time, there was no date of Shavuot, because if you scroll down, we're just going to move a little bit forward in the source sheet. Don't worry, we'll come back to all this fun stuff. If you look at source number 6, which is a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, Gemara says, Kiditani Rav Shmaya, Atzeret, Pa'amim Chamisha, Pa'amim Shisha, Pa'amim Shiva. Rav Shmaya taught that the holiday of Atzeret, which is what we call Shavuot, sometimes it's on the 5th of the month, sometimes it's on the 6th of the month, sometimes it's on the 7th of the month being Sivan, by the way. So Shavuot apparently does not have a set date. Now, we do have a set date for Shavuot. If you're starting to get nervous that maybe you got the date of Shavuot wrong, no, you don't have to worry, because since we've had a set calendar, since the Jewish calendar became set and wasn't based on seeing the full moon every month and declaring when Rosh Chodesh was, we've decided when is Shavuot? Shavuot is the 6th of Sivan. We take sort of the average of the dates. Okay, it's not based on whether a month has 29 days or 30 days. The 6th of Sivan is the date of Shavuot. So I hope I've already shown you that there's something very strange about Shavuot, right? We don't know when it is. We figured out when it is. How do we figure out when it is? We count 50 days from the 2nd day of Pesach, right? The Torah told us how to get to the date. We count, but it didn't tell us what the date is. That's the first thing that's weird about Shavuot, that the Torah never tells us what the date is. There's a second thing that's weird about Shavuot that's only weird once you know it. What do I mean by that? Well, everybody knows what we celebrate on Shavuot, right? What do we celebrate on Shavuot? We celebrate cheesecake. No, cheesecake is sort of a side point. We celebrate the giving of the Torah. Right? In davening, we say Shavuot is Zman Matan Toratenu. It is the day that we receive the Torah. Just like Pesach is Zman Cherutenu, the day of our freedom, right? So Shavuot is the day that we got the Torah. How do we know that the Jews left Mitzrayim on Pesach? Because it tells us that the Jews left Mitzrayim on the 15th of Nisan. How do we know that the Jews got the Torah on the 6th of Sivan? Well, we don't. Really? What do we mean we don't really? How is this possible? Yes, somebody corrected me in the chat, of course, that what we're looking for to establish Rosh Chodesh is the new moon, not the full moon. Thank you. Thank you, Judy Landau. That's of course correct. So how do we know that the Jews got the Torah on the 6th of Sivan? We don't. Okay, now I'll try to prove to you that maybe this is true, but in fact, the Torah does not tell us when we got the Torah. And once again, I want to show you that this is strange, and I want to convince you that this is on purpose. Now, you might say, you're telling me that we don't know when Shavuot is, and you're telling me we don't know when the Jews got the Torah. Maybe they didn't happen on the same day. Maybe it's not the same holiday. Maybe somebody just put them together. Now, this is actually a very good question, and there's a separate shir, which is not the shir that we're giving right now, which is about what are the earliest sources that show that we put together the holiday of Shavuot and the holiday of the giving of the Torah. There is actually really only one Gemara, only one source from the Amoraic period, which says this explicitly, which again is very interesting and for another shir, which is source number 2, where there's a discussion about whether it would be appropriate to spend all day of Shavuot in prayer and in Torah learning. And the Gemara says something counterintuitive. Source number 2, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Hakol modim ba'atzeret diba'ina nami lachem. Rabbi Elazar says everybody agrees that on Shavuot, you need to spend some time doing like physical enjoyment, having a nice meal, taking a nap. My time, why? Yom shenitna bo Torahu, because it's the day that the Torah was given. Again, this is counterintuitive. There seems to be some idea here that God gave us the Torah, and therefore we need to sort of celebrate it, not just by learning the Torah. But this is actually the earliest source available that connects the holiday of Shavuot as the day that the Torah was given. There is no explicit source. And again, this plays into what I'm trying to convince you of, which is that there is something mysterious going on with the date of Shavuot. It sounds like a conspiracy theory, but that's actually what it is. There's a conspiracy theory here to hide the date of Shavuot from us and to hide the date of Matan Torah. How do I know that they're trying to hide the date of Matan Torah from us? Well, let's look at the story of the Jewish people receiving the Torah, because I've learned many different chapters of the Torah before. And sometimes the story is clear what's going on. Sometimes it's not always so clear. But there are very few things, very few moments in the Torah where I've read something and said, this is confusing on purpose. It's not that I don't understand what's going on. It's that this is confusing on purpose. How do I know? So let's look together at the beginning of Parak Yud Tet of Sefer Shemot. We're in source number 3. It's a whole chunk. It's the beginning of the Jewish people arriving at Har Sinai to receive the Torah. It starts like this. We won't read the whole thing. B'chodesh hashlishi l'tzeit b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. In the 3rd month from when the Jewish people left Egypt, Bayom hazeh ba'u midbar Sinai. On this day, they arrived in the Sinai desert. What day? What do you mean on this day they arrived? There is something already jumping out at us that on the one hand, we have information being provided to us, and on the other hand, there's something that's being hidden from us. And in a couple of minutes, we'll look at how Rashi interprets this pasuk. But just imagine, right, that you have a story that opens with, on the one hand, like a general sense of sense at all. Now let's see what happens. So they get to Midbar Sinai. How do they get there? They traveled from Refidim, they came to the desert of Sinai, they camped in the desert, and the people camped opposite the mountain. There's already a mountain there, important mountain. Moshe Allah el Halokim. Moshe goes up clearly onto the mountain to God. Vayikra elav Hashem min hahar lemor, ko tamar levet Yaakov v'tagid libnei Yisrael. So Moshe goes up, then God calls to him, and says, this is what you should tell the Jewish people. There's a lot of flowery language in here. It's really quite beautiful. God's sort of introducing himself to the Jewish people. We're not really paying much attention to that, but it's beautiful. So he says, You have seen what I did to Egypt, and I've carried you on the wings of eagles, and I brought you to me. And now if you shall listen to my voice and you shall keep my covenant, then you shall be a special nation for me amongst all the nations, because the land is mine. And you shall be for me a kingdom of Kohanim and a holy nation. This is what I want you to tell the people. Okay, so Bnei Israel get to Midbar. His travels. He knows he has to go up on the mountain. God introduces himself. God introduces himself to Moshe, and he says, are you guys willing to be my nation? Okay, do you want to be my people? Go ask the Jews. So Moshe was up on the mountain, he goes down the mountain, right? And he calls the elders, and he tells them what God said. And the people, right, he goes from the elders to all the people, and all the people say, whatever God wants, that's what we'll do. And so Moshe goes back up the mountain to tell God what the people said. So God says to Moshe, okay, I'm going to come talk to you in a cloud so that everybody will hear when I talk to you, and then they will all believe in you because they'll know that you communicate. And then Moshe tells God something that the people said, which is weird because we didn't hear anything that the people said. So that's like a big question mark. And then God talks back. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, lech el ha'am v'kidashtem hayom u'machar v'chibsu sivnotam. Hashem says to Moshe, go to the people, tell them to wash their clothing today and tomorrow, make themselves holy. And be ready for the third day, because on the third day, God's going to come onto the mountain and talk. Okay, and then it continues. Also, make sure to put up a fence so that nobody comes onto the mountain. Okay, and then pasuk Yudalid, Vayired Moshe min hahar al ha'am. Okay, Moshe goes down from the mountain, talks to the people, makes them wash their clothes. Vayomer al ha'am hayu nechonim l'shloshet yamin. Then Moshe says, be ready for 3 days. And then pasuk Tedzayin, Vayhi bayom hashlishi biyot haboker. God shows up on the third day. Okay, I don't know if you've been trying to keep track, but I've gone through this multiple times, and I cannot figure out how many days this story takes place. How many times does Moshe go up and down the mountain? Each time he goes up and down the mountain, is this like a 15-minute walk? Is this like an hours-long hike? He's going back and forth carrying messages. How long does this take? It feels like we get so much information. And we keep hearing they came on this day and then be ready for 3 days. But at the end, I have no idea what is the calendar date on the third day. Now, maybe some of you think that you can figure this out. I cannot figure out how much time this took. Okay. Now, where does the complication show up? So part of the complication shows up in the question of when it says that Moshe spoke back to God what the nation said, and we hadn't heard what the nation had said. In fact, that adds a layer of complication. And if we had more time, we would look at Rashi, where Rashi explains that this is where the Jewish people said, God, we want to see you face to face directly. We don't want to see you through Moshe. We don't want to see you through a cloud. We want to talk face to face. Ritzonenu l'ra'ot malkeinu. We want to see our God. And Moshe had to negotiate that back and forth. That's how Rashi understands it. Many understand it that way. But the point that's interesting to me is that we hear over and over how long this is going to take. And
Everybody has her frozen, right? It's not just me.
Yes.
Yeah, okay,
Not
well,
just
wait a
me.
minute. Okay, and I'll tell her when hopefully she'll come back in a sec. me at least write her. I'm assuming she got kicked off and she'll be back in a minute. So apologize for that, but as you know, I don't control these things. I do what I can, but we do a pretty good job, but I can't control everything.
It's been great, Rabbi Jay. It's been
Okay.
super.
Thank you. Thank you. If need be, I have a backup for Tori, I can always throw up there, but okay. But that's all right. Benny should be okay. Hopefully she'll be back in a minute.
I should give you credit. You did a great job on that link the other day after I told you about it.
About the rain?
The link.
Oh, the rain.
Remember the broken link? And you had to.
Oh, the broken link. Yeah. I don't know how that happened, but thank God that got fixed. Yeah. That people had to put in the passcode to enter for a few days, but we fixed that.
Hi, all. Apologies.
Yeah. Okay. You
sorry.
were frozen for about a minute and a half. I don't know what that want to go back. You know how long it took.
Okay, I'm back.
Yeah. Okay, so go.
I apologize. Okay. So, I'm not sure what we missed. So very, very quickly, the rabbis of the Talmud were not sure when the Torah was given either. Okay. I said that I couldn't figure it out. They couldn't figure it out either. They had a slightly different issue. Let's look at it together. We won't read this whole long chunk of text, and we'll read some of it. Tanu Rabbanan, source number 5. Bishishi b'chodesh nitnu aseret hadibrot liYisrael. Rabbi Yossi omer b'shiv abo. The rabbis debated. The rabbis as a group said that the Torah was given on the 6th of Sivan. Rabbi Yossi says it was the 7th of Sivan. Amar Rava. So Rava and Amora tries to explain the Tanaitic debate. Dekule alma b'rosh chodesh atu lemidbar Sinai. Rava says they all agree that the Jewish people arrived in the Sinai desert on Rosh Chodesh Sivan. How do they know? K'tiv hacha bayom hazeh ba'u midbar Sinai. U'k'tiv hatam hachodesh hazeh lachem Rosh Chodeshim. It says when they come to the Sinai desert, bayom hazeh, on this day. And it says, hachodesh hazeh lachem, this day shall be for you Rosh Chodesh. Malahalan Rosh Chodesh, afkan Rosh Chodesh. When one says zeh, it's Rosh Chodesh. The other one says zeh, it's also Rosh Chodesh. V'tikule alma b'Shabbat nitna Torah l'Yisrael. And they agree, everybody agrees that the Torah was given on Shabbat. Interestingly, skip to the next line, the very end. Ki pligi b'kvia diyarcha. Their debate is what day was Rosh Chodesh when they arrived. Rabbi Yossi savar b'chad b'Shabbat ikva yarcha. Okay, Rabbi Yossi thinks as follows. It was Rosh Chodesh on Sunday. Ubechad b'Shabbat lo amar lehu v'lo midei mishum chulsha deorcha. God did not speak to Moshe on Sunday because they were tired from traveling. Bitrei b'Shabbat amar lehu v'atem tiyu li mamlechet kohanim. On Monday, God said to Moshe that you can be my nation. Would you guys like to? Betzlata amar lehu mitzvat hagbala. And on Tuesday, he told him the rules of separating, like blocking off the mountain and preparing for receiving the Torah. Barba, Avud Prisha, and on Wednesday, that was when they, the men and women separated from each other and they began to spiritually prepare for Matan Torah. Rabbanan Savre, the rabbis disagree, and they say, Betrei b'Shaba ikva yarcha, Betrei b'Shaba lo amar lehu v'lo midi mishum chulsha deorcha. The Jewish people arrived on Rosh Chodesh on Monday. God didn't speak to Moshe on Monday because he was tired from traveling. Bitzlata amar lehu v'atem tiyu li, Barba amar lehu mitzvat hagbala b'chamisha avud prisha. And then on Tuesday, he said, you'll be my nation. On Wednesday, he said, block off the mountain. On Thursday, that was when they did prisha. Okay, so if you look at the chart, you can see how this works out, right? Rabbi Yossi's chart has Bnei Israel arriving on Rosh Chodesh on Sunday, and then Matan Torah is on Zayin Sivan on Shabbat. And the Chachamim, the Rabbanan, their position is that the Jewish people arrived on Monday, and then they received the Torah on Shabbat, which was the 6th of Sivan. What's the difference? The difference is whether there were 3 days of separation or 2 days of separation. The part of the Gemara that we're skipping, but that's very, very cool, is that Rabbi Yossi thinks that while God only told Moshe that the Jews needed 2 days of preparation for Matan Torah, Moshe decided to add a third day. Okay, Moshe decided to add a third day. And then what's really cool is the Gemara says God agreed with Moshe. How do we know that God agreed with Moshe? Because God didn't show up until after the third day, right? According to Rabbi Yossi, God was ready on the 6th of Sivan, but Moshe said, I think we need an extra day, and so God waited. Okay, that's very, very cool, by the way. But let's just relate this back to what we said before, which was my claim that there is like deliberate obstruction going on in the story. That if we look back in the story, we saw Moshe goes up and down, and he goes up and down, and then they say, be ready for the third day, because on the third day, right? And still the rabbis debate, what does it mean on the third day? Is it that there were 2 days of preparation and then the third day, or does it mean that there were 3 days of preparation, and then it's really the fourth day, but it was the third full day after the third full day of preparation, right? The rabbis are reading this story, and they're saying there's some things that we know, and yet there are still some things that it feels like we don't know. There's still question marks, right? They actually managed to agree about everything else, about how many days the introductory process took, the negotiations between Moshe and God, right? That's something that I thought was unclear also. Chacham and Rabbi Yossi agree about that, but they still managed to disagree about something. So how do we paskin? We paskin like the Chachamim given. But what we do is we keep
Frozen again.
Yes, we realize, of course. Okay.
Chase, just send you the handout.
Oh, hi Benny. How are you? Okay, we're not quite finished, but okay. You may start sooner than you think. We'll see. Okay, hopefully.
You tell me when to start?
Yeah. Well, no. Our speaker before, who is frozen out, she'll finish up in a couple minutes. She'll come back, and then we'll get started.
You have the
Benny,
handout.
Achron Chavi, Benny. Okay.
I believe I froze again. So let's do the last.
Yeah,
let's do the last again,
yeah.
Okay?
Right. You froze again, and let's hopefully
last idea. Last idea. The last idea is, why don't we know when Shavuot is? Again, we know when Shavuot is. We keep it every year. Now I want to look at that Rashi that we skipped. Look at source number 4. Rashi says, why does the pasuk say this strange thing, bayom hazeh? Why does it say on this day, on that day, the Jewish people came to Midbar Sinai? Why doesn't it tell us the date? And Rashi has a beautiful idea. He says, Rosh Chodesh, it was Rosh Chodesh, but he says, Lo hayat tzarich lichtov ela bayom hahu, ma'u bayom hazeh. Why doesn't it say it was that day? Why does it say hazeh? Sheyu divrei Torah chadashim alecha ki'ilu hayom nitnu. That every day we should feel like the Torah was given to us that day. Okay? Now, what does that mean? So it could be very technical that Torah should feel new to us every day. Okay, when we learn Torah, it should feel exciting. I love that idea. But there's something even better than that. There is a danger to having too much certainty when it comes to Torah. There's a danger in having so much certainty that I know exactly when the Torah was given. I know exactly every detail of it, and I'm going to commemorate a moment that's frozen in time. Shavuot is about us saying, I think that this is the day God gave the Torah, but you know what? It wouldn't even matter if it wasn't. Because what if Rabbi Yossi was right and the Torah was given on the 7th day? Well, the first thing is that would mean that you and Chutz La'aretz are the only people celebrating Shavuot on the right day, right? The upside is maybe the 2nd day of Shavuos is actually the real day, but really it doesn't matter, because really the idea is that we celebrate the day that we committed to God and God committed to us. And we said, we want to learn your Torah. And it doesn't really matter, as crazy as it is. And I think that that's what's going on. The Torah is trying to hint to us that you can figure out the day the Torah was given, but bottom line, it doesn't really make a difference. What matters is our commitment to Torah. What matters is our living the Torah every single day. The date on the calendar is not what's important. Thank you so much to everybody who joined, and have a Chag Shavuot Sameach.